My sister never raised her voice when she mocked me. She didn't have to. Her words were always wrapped in laughter, sugar, coated just enough to make anyone who noticed look overly sensitive. That was her talent, turning humiliation into entertainment and calling it humor. It usually started at family gatherings. So, she'd say, leaning back in her chair like she was settling in for a show, "How's that healthcare tech job going? Not career?" "Not work, always job," said with air quotes. She didn't bother hiding. I'd answer politely. I always did. Something vague, something safe. "It's going well, busy." She'd smile wider. "Busy doing what exactly?" "Fixing printers at hospitals." The table would chuckle. Not cruelly, just enough. I learned early that explaining made it worse. The moment I mentioned algorithms, patient data, or clinical systems, eyes glazed over. Confusion made people uncomfortable, and discomfort made them side with the joke rather than the explanation. Meanwhile, her accomplishments were simple and shiny. Finance, promotions, titles everyone understood. When she spoke, people listened. When I spoke, they nodded politely and waited for her next punchline. "You know," she once said, cutting her steak, "when I tell people what you do, I just say it's easier." Easier for who? Not for me, I smiled again. I always smiled, because disagreeing would mean admitting that her words landed. That they stayed, that they followed me home and echoed while I lay awake questioning myself. Was I really just hiding behind screens? Did my work actually matter? What hurt most wasn't that she didn't respect my job, it was that she never tried to. She decided it wasn't important long before she understood it. And after that, understanding wasn't necessary. At home, alone, my laptop glowed with dashboards and alerts from hospitals, hundreds of miles away. Systems I helped build monitored heart rates, oxygen levels, warning signs no human eye could catch fast enough. Quiet victories, invisible ones, no applause, no stories at dinner, just silence, and her laughter replaying in my head. I told myself it didn't bother me, that I was above it, that purpose mattered more than praise, but repeated long enough, even jokes carved dents in your confidence. And slowly, without anyone noticing, not even me, I began shrinking into the version of myself she thought I was. By the time I realized my sister's jokes had shaped how others saw me, they had already shaped how I saw myself. At work, I stayed silent in meetings longer than I should have. When an idea formed in my head, I tested it 3 times before speaking, afraid it might sound small or unimportant, just like she always implied my work was. I became reliable, efficient, invisible, the kind of person people depended on but rarely noticed. And yet, the systems I worked on were everywhere. Hospitals across the region relied on our software to flag early signs of patient distress. Nurses checked dashboards I had helped design during night shifts when exhaustion blurred judgment. Doctors trusted alerts that quietly nudged them toward faster decisions. Lives moved forward because something worked the way it was supposed to. But none of that fit into a sentence at dinner. When I mentioned a break, through once how our update reduced ICU response times, my sister waved it off. "That's great," she said, distracted by her phone. "But isn't that just what machines are supposed to do?" I nodded, swallowing the urge to explain that machines don't care unless someone teaches them how. The invitation arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. My inbox chimed between bug reports and system logs. Healthcare Innovation Summit, speaker invitation. I read it 3 times before it felt real. They wanted me to present our work, my work, to an audience of professionals from around the world. Engineers, clinicians, policymakers, people who understood the weight of what I did. That night, I told my sister. She laughed, not unkindly, but not seriously either. "Wow, you're speaking now," she said. "How many people are into that kind of stuff?" "About 2,000, I replied quietly. Her eyebrows lifted for a split second, surprise quickly masked by a shrug. "Hope they bring coffee," she said. Tech talks can be rough. Later, alone in my room, doubt crept in like it always did. 2,000 people meant 2,000 chances to be exposed. To stumble, to confirm every unspoken criticism I'd absorbed over the years. I stared at my blank presentation, heart racing. Then I remembered the emails, the thank yous, the message from a nurse who wrote, Your alert gave me 10 minutes. 10 minutes saved his life. I didn't need to be loud. I didn't need approval. I just needed to tell the truth. So I began building my talk not to impress, but to honor the quiet work that had always spoken louder than laughter. The morning of the summit arrived heavier than I expected. The convention center loomed like a glass giant, reflecting a sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. Inside, everything echoed footsteps, voices, nerves. Badges swung from lanyards, names and titles printed boldly, confidently. I adjusted mine and felt for a moment like an imposter who'd slipped past security. Backstage, I could hear the low roar of the crowd. 2,000 people settling into their seats. 2,000 professionals who spoke the language of impact and outcomes. My palms dampened as I waited for my name to be called. What if she's right? The thought crept in uninvited. What if this was all just noise? What if my work sounded small when spoken aloud? Then the lights dimmed. Please welcome our next speaker. I walked onto the stage under a wash of white light that erased the audience into shadow. The screen behind me flickered to life. For a heartbeat, I said nothing. Then I took a breath and began. I didn't start with code. I started with a night shift, a nurse, alone at 3 a.m., watching monitors blink while exhaustion blurred the edges of her focus. A patient whose vitals looked stable until they weren't. I talked about how easily those moments are missed, not because of incompetence, but because humans are human. The room grew quiet. I showed them the system, how patterns emerge before alarms scream, how minutes, sometimes seconds, are the difference between recovery and regret. Graphs appeared, case studies followed. Numbers fell into place like proof waiting to be seen. Halfway through, I noticed heads nodding. Pens moving, people leaning forward. By the end, my voice was steady. This isn't about replacing care, I said. It's about protecting it, especially when the system is tired. Silence, then one person stood, then another. And suddenly, the room moved as one. 2,000 people rose to their feet, applause swelling like a wave crashing against years of quiet doubt. I felt it in my chest, my throat, my hands, not pride, recognition. In that moment, every joke, every dismissal, every time I'd shrunk myself dissolved into something solid and unshakable. I wasn't invisible. Backstage, leaders approached with urgency and respect. Hospitals asked for collaboration. Someone said, "This should be standard everywhere." I smiled, not because I'd proven anyone wrong, but because for the first time the world had seen what I'd always known. The applause faded, but something inside me stayed loud. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after the summit. I still wrote code. I still solved problems no one would clap for. But the difference was subtle and permanent. I no longer questioned whether my work deserved space in the world. A few weeks later, my sister asked to meet. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and the low hum of conversations that let silences exist without pressure. She looked different, not smaller, just quieter. "I watched your talk," she said, stirring her coffee even though it had long gone cold. "All of it. I waited. I'd learned patience well. I didn't know." She continued, her voice careful. "I didn't understand what you did. And instead of admitting that, I made it a joke. I made you the joke." Her words landed heavier than any insult she'd ever thrown. "Because this time they carried truth. For years," she said, eyes fixed on the cup, "I thought importance had to look impressive, loud, easy to explain. Watching you, I realized I was wrong." I felt no urge to defend myself, no desire to list every moment she'd hurt me. Sweet revenge had already happened, and it hadn't required a single cruel word. "I never needed you to praise me," I said gently. "I just needed you not to belittle what you didn't understand." She nodded, tears slipping free without ceremony. "I'm sorry," she whispered. We sat there a while longer, the past finally acknowledged instead of laughed away. That night, I updated my calendar. Another invitation, another summit, bigger this time, global. As I prepared new slides, I thought about how close I'd come to backing out of the first one, how easily I could have let someone else's ignorance define my limits. I didn't need rooms to stand for me anymore. I could stand on my own. But knowing that 2,000 people once rose, not for a title, not for noise, but for quiet, meaningful work, was something I carried with me. Not as revenge, as reassurance. Some jobs don't look important until the moment they save someone. And some people don't realize your worth until you stop shrinking to make them comfortable. I closed my laptop, smiling not small, not loud, just certain.